Give everybody just one more minute and get started. All right. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to our third edition of the FPA Summer Program Speaker Series. A couple announcements before we dive in today. Your small group sessions will be next week, so small group leaders should be sending out meeting requests here shortly. During that time, we'll do two things. We'll reflect on today's session and then also get prepared for our sustainability workshop coming up on Friday, July 23rd. The summer's quickly flying by. But with that, why don't we go ahead and dive in? We're excited to be joined by Dr. Loran Nordgren, professor at the Kellogg School of Management at Northwestern University. Dr. Nordgren is the author of a new book called The Human Element, Overcoming the Resistance That Awaits New Ideas. And the book is set to release in October and is already one of Amazon's best-selling new releases in the business section. So with that, can everyone give Dr. Nordgren a warm Zoom welcome? And Dr. Nordgren, I'll hand it off to you.
All right, good morning. Perfect, thank you so much. And please, everyone, let's drop titles. Are you familiar with the American woman's name, Loran? You know this name? That too is my name. So please just Loran. It's great to be with you all. Is everybody feeling good this morning? Haddon, how are we feeling? Good? Melissa, Becca, Cassie, Amy, it's great to be with you all. For those I see and the rest on this call. So my understanding is that you have read the first chapter. So that's a starting assumption. And so I'm going to skip some of the typical intro because I have some sense you have some understanding of friction theory. So just for context, Zapurva mentioned, for about 5 years, my co-author and I, David Schoenthal, have been working on a framework, a set of ideas that we call friction theory. And we have now put this theory out into the world, and I'm excited to share it with you. To get us warmed up and to make clear that this is going to be an interactive experience, I want to start off with, I think, a question that'll be very easy and interesting for us to think about. And that is, I'd love to hear about what you as a company, you as an employee, you as a leader and manager, what is it you want? And what I mean by that is, so take my home institution, Kellogg. There are countless things Kellogg wants. So Kellogg wants to increase the number of applications it receives. That's something it wants. It wants students to get vaccinated. That's something it wants. It wants students to be happy. It wants students to choose Kellogg over Harvard and Stanford. That's not going to happen anytime soon, but that's something that it wants. I have plenty of things that I want. So I would like more people. I want people to buy the book. That's something I want. There's certain industries I'd like to make contact with and work with more than I do today. So in essence, conceptually what I'm interested in is what are ways in which you would like the future state, ways big or small, to be different than the present state. So let's put some ideas on the board and I'll try and call back to them. So what are some things we as a company want or you as a manager want? Amy, and I very delicately put people on the spot, so we should get used to that. Amy, what's something that you guys want? Would you mind sharing?
We want better sales numbers.
Better sales numbers, absolutely. Is that clear? Like, what's the size scale of that change?
Our growth numbers are around 24 million by 2025.
Okay, and they are like, and what is that today?
I can't share that.
Fair enough, fair enough. But are we saying like an incremental change or a huge change? That's what I'm trying to understand.
It's gonna be a huge change, yeah.
Huge change. Perfect. That's perfect. Thank you, Amy. Abby, what's something you guys want? What's something that you want?
Increased employee engagement.
Mm-hmm. So what would that look like? Like, how would you know if the thing you want is happening, if you're succeeding or failing?
Manufacturing retention rates.
Mm.
Overall, we do surveys, random surveys of employees, so overall wellness ratings and things like that.
Okay, so things like retention rate. Perfect. Cassie, what's something you guys want?
We want more people to apply for jobs who are actually manufacturing our products.
Okay, so more apply for jobs who are actually manufacturing the products. Absolutely.
And then stay for
And
a
then
long
stay.
time.
Okay. All right, that's perfect. Bradley, are there things, important things for the company that haven't been mentioned yet?
I would say for us, some lower scrap rates.
Lower scrap rates. And the scrap rates here mean like you're trying to, it's reduced inefficiency or waste?
Yeah, that's exactly what.
All right, perfect. So now that we are thinking about the things we want and need to be successful, what we're going to do is explore some of the factors and features that determine whether these wants, or what I'll call them, innovations. So that could be a product innovation, a policy innovation, a cultural innovation. We're going to explore some of the factors, particularly the hidden factors, that determine whether these new ideas and innovations will succeed or fail. And that exploration begins in an interesting place. So let's start in the physical world. So anytime you launch a physical object into space, whether that is a bullet, it could be an airplane, a pitcher's fastball, anytime you launch an object, there are two opposing forces at play. There are forces that propel that object forward, that give it thrust, and there are constraining forces that oppose forward progress. Those are things like gravity and wind resistance or drag. Now, much in the same way we see these opposing forces in the physical world, you can see these very same forces when we try and launch new ideas and innovations, when we're trying to do things like, Bradley, I suspect there is a proposal or an idea about how you might reduce scrap rate. When you try and launch that idea, there will be two forces at play. Whenever we launch a new idea, there are forces that give this idea forward thrust or appeal. We refer to these forces as fuel. Fuel is anything that it creates excitement, appeal. So this is benefits, adding benefits and features to a product elevates appeal and is therefore fuel. Putting sizzle on the messaging to entice excitement heightens appeal and is therefore fuel. Incentives, fuel. Fuel is anything that ignites our desire for change. But like physical objects, when we launch new ideas, there are also frictions that oppose change. So frictions they're often hidden forces, we often don't see them, but frictions are there quietly undermining our innovation. Now, the first principle of friction theory has to do with a deep assumption of the mind. It's an idea that is a universal feature of human behavior. And it's the idea that when we think about how we sell new ideas, when we think about how do we bring new ideas into life, how do we create change, the default assumption of the mind is the way you sell a new idea or create change is through fuel. We try and elevate appeal. The intuitive mind believes that if I want you to say yes to me or my ideas, what I'm trying to do is elevate value, elevate appeal. And if I do that enough, eventually you will say yes. And I also believe that if you are rejecting what I am offering, it's because fuel is insufficient. In other words, if I look at the examples you have shared, if retention rate is lower than you want, if sales aren't increasing to meet your goals, if people aren't applying for jobs at the rate you want, the intuitive mind believes the reason we are failing is because fuel is insufficient. We call this habit of the mind, this fixation on fuel, we call that a fuel-based mindset, or thinking in fuel. The problem is that in focusing on fuel to sell new ideas, we tend to neglect the other half of the equation, the frictions that oppose innovation and change. So the fuel-based mindset, like if you simply apply fuel to your new ideas and innovations, this would be like, imagine building an airplane and only thinking about the jet engines, like the engines, the propulsion system or the propeller, and not thinking about things like weight and aerodynamics. That is, we argue, precisely what innovators do when they try and bring new ideas into the world. And once you understand that, you begin to see why so few of our ideas and innovations take flight. Now, the reason we default to fuel, the reason why humans have a fuel-based mindset is because we explain behavior in terms of internal forces. We understand behavior in terms of things like motivation and intent. So the classic example of this is the angry driver. So imagine you're out on the highway and someone flies by you, cuts you off, is driving rudely and recklessly. The automatic assumption, the intuition of the mind, like what you think is that person's a jerk, right? That is an internal attribution. What we don't naturally think about, what we don't as easily bring to mind is maybe that driver has a full bladder. And this attribution, this habit of the mind, maps perfectly onto fuel. So if you are trying to get people to buy your product and you're not hitting your goals, like people aren't interested in what you're offering, the intuitive mind thinks that's because people aren't sufficiently excited, like the appeal is insufficient. And if that's the problem your mind creates, the solution to that problem is to do what? It's to elevate appeal. And what does that job? Fuel does that job. To see this, I did a study 2 years ago in which there's a nonprofit that what they do is they create something called hero cards. And hero cards are designed to create some comfort and social support for children who are hospitalized, often for long-term, serious issues. And the idea of the hero cards is students, classmates, members of the community send these cards, letters of support to children. The idea is rather than having them experience this already traumatic event in a very clinical and cold hospital setting, the walls of their room can be adorned with social support. That's the idea of hero cards. And as you can imagine, one change they're trying to create is they're trying to increase the number of people who contribute. The more hero cards written, the better. Much like you want to increase engagement, they want to increase engagement. So we asked a bunch of people, well, how would you do that? So imagine you are this nonprofit and what you want to do is increase engagement. And when we asked people that question, 2 ideas came up again and again. One, offers incentives of some form, sometimes money, but often in the context of class and school, of pizza and things for writing these cards. Or the most common idea emotional appeals, like show people quite vividly the power and impact these cards have, right? Make it vivid and tangible that these cards will powerfully impact these sick children. So we decided to test the effectiveness of these two ideas. Like, would they work in increasing engagement? And we also added something of our own. Our third strategy is we just created templates that gave people a guide, examples of what they might write. So it turns out incentives and emotional appeals barely moved the needle. In fact, the incentives slightly backfired. What did move the needle, what significantly increased engagement, was creating simple templates. And the reason that was effective is because, right, so these other two approaches, what are they attempting to do? They are fuel-based. They're trying to show the benefit. They're trying to heighten the appeal of doing this thing. Now, does anyone not think this is an important idea? Of course they do. The issue is not that of fuel. What this template approach does is it removes some frictions. It both makes it easier and it removes the anxiety of what to write. Like maybe people are concerned that they'll say the wrong thing. What we see here is the second principle of friction theory, which is when we are trying to create value, when we are trying to create change, there are two ways we can do that. We can add benefits and we can reduce cost. The habit of the mind, because we fixate on fuel, means that fuel is the overexploited resource. All the easy opportunities to increase benefits have generally been consumed very quickly. Because we fixate on fuel, our blind spot, the aspect of this equation that we neglect, are the frictions that oppose the change we want to create. This is the untapped resource. And for that reason, if we shift our mindset, if we start thinking not just in terms of fuel, but also in terms of the frictions that oppose change, we can often create tremendous value. So let's look at an example, and then we'll do a case study to pull you in to this framework.
Loran, couple questions.
Yeah.
Your example there reminds me of like the organ donor setting on driver's licenses. I saw the story somewhere, and it has to do with default settings, and states were wanting to get people to be organ donors if something traumatically was supposed to happen while they're driving or whatever. And when they made the default setting on that you're going to be an organ donor, they got over 80% compliance. And prior to that, and people were thinking more about why wouldn't I be an organ donor if I was to be deceased versus the alternative, which is why would I donate my organs if I were to be deceased. That was really interesting for me to just kind of read it that way because it totally changed the mindset. Maybe a less traumatic example and question for you would be, where does priority sit between fuel and friction? Something might be high priority for me, but for my team or individuals on the team, maybe lower priority. And it's something, I think all of us struggle with a lot. Something might seem very important to us, but not important to the other person. And we generally would go towards the appeal route, selling benefits, when, maybe that's not the case there.
Yeah. So first, we're actually going to see that organ donor thing in just a moment. And so that absolutely connects. And secondly, in terms of priorities, if I may, what I'd like to do is let's look at the friction model, because then we can do that analysis. So my sense is higher priority. The fuel aspect of priority is the way I'm trying to get you to do something. Like the fuel-based mindset is to try and increase the priority, increase the urgency, momentum, anything that creates motivation, desire for change, that might be a higher priority. But what we might be seeing is sometimes in doing that, it may inadvertently create frictions for others. I think that's kind of the tension you're getting at. So here's a quick case study for us to think about. I've done some work with the US Army and specifically their enrollment office. Now, as you can imagine, very similar to some of the things you want. What does the US Army want? They want to increase enrollment. They want to increase enrollment. They want to increase the quality of their candidates, etc. Now, the US Army, like everyone else, thinks in fuel. And so their target audience is generally juniors and seniors in high school, right? That's when they begin making their pitch. And there is the idea of joining the military. There is a lot of fuel in the military. It's a high fueled offer. There is purpose and meaning, camaraderie, connection, patriotism, see the world, excitement, exploration. For some, it's a path to upward professional advancement, right? It is a highly fueled offer. But the US Army was encountering this issue. So when they would pitch, right, when they would reach out to these students, they would get these students who seem so interested, so excited. You know, they're taking the initiative, reaching out, having multiple meetings. But then something happens, they disappear. They never actually enroll. They take the application, they ask follow-up questions, like this is from a sales perspective. This is someone you would think you've got on the line, and somewhere along the line, they lose them. Now, the US Army thinks, well, if people aren't fully signing up, it must be because fuel is insufficient. So because of that, they launched this huge multi-million-dollar TV campaign, web campaign that you've probably seen, that quite dramatically and vividly shows all the fuel. You see the special forces person with connection and patriotism, all of those rich motivational benefits. So it turns out, once we began to dig into this process, fuel wasn't the issue at all. Turns out there were a set of frictions, and one in particular that was holding these students back from the thing they wanted to do. What do you think it was? What might have been some of the frictions that were holding them back? What do you think? Kenneth, any thoughts? And if no, then call on somebody else.
You know, my first reaction would be the potential negative outcomes of joining the military would be a huge friction.
So maybe at some level, it's enticing because of the excitement, but maybe it's the fear. Is it like that? Like the risk, life loss, that sort of thing? That might be the friction. Kenneth, who else do you think in the room might have a good idea?
How about Todd?
Todd, are you with us?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing is fear of the unknown, I guess, would be one thing.
So fear of the unknown, uncertainty, that could have been the friction. Becca, what are you thinking? What is maybe holding them back?
I'm thinking maybe like family pressure or peer pressure to do something else, maybe.
Okay, do something else. Haddon, what are you thinking? You're unmuted, but I'm not hearing you. Computer muted? Give it another shot, otherwise we'll move on. Yeah, we got you, Haddon. Yeah.
Okay, I definitely agree with family and friends who would be worried for you and would express that concern. That could stop somebody.
Yeah, the principal friction that was holding them back is what Haddon and Becca touched upon. These students were afraid to tell their parents. These students, above all, were afraid to tell their mom. Right? These are, think about the 17-year-old self, the 18-year-old self. You've probably never initiated a serious conversation in your life. Like, what is required of you is to say, tonight's the night after dinner, I'm going to say family meeting, everyone in the living room. I've made a big decision. I've decided to enlist in the Army. For a lot of these people, it's precisely what they want to do, but the fear, the anxiety, the discomfort in having that conversation is a bridge too far. It's too great, and they never enroll. Notice how all the things the Army is doing, this slick ad campaign, putting your foot on the gas, increasing fuel, does that help them with their problem? It does nothing to help them with the problem that they have. So the idea I want to offer to you is that if we start not just thinking in terms of fuel, but thinking in terms of friction, we can often unlock change and innovation. So to understand friction and how it operates, let's look at the anatomy of an idea. So all new ideas, like if you've got an innovation, a new product, a new change initiative, whatever it may be, all ideas have four basic elements. The first element of an idea is, what is the degree of change it represents? That's why I was asking Amy about when she said better sales, what's the magnitude of that change? Is it a slight tweak, or is it double what we've ever done in the past? This first dimension is this a slight tweak or a sharp break from the status quo? The answer to that question determines the first friction, which is what we'll call inertia. The human mind naturally, inherently favors the familiar over the unfamiliar. The bigger the change, the more unfamiliar, the more unknown. I think Kenneth used that phrase, the fear of the unknown, the greater the inertia. The second dimension is every idea must be implemented, and there's generally some cost to implementation. Right? So learning a new procedure is a cost. Breaking a habit is a cost. The question here is that cost slight or substantial? The answer to that question determines the second friction, what we call effort. As we'll see in just a moment, the human mind is highly sensitive to effort and cost. The bigger the cost of implementation, the greater the resistance. Third, new ideas produce reactions and emotions. We want our ideas to produce positive feelings like confidence, surprise, and delight. But very often, new ideas and innovations produce precisely the opposite experience of what we intend: fear, anxiety. This is precisely the friction. We call this emotional friction. This is precisely the friction that was operating in the Army case. It was the fear to have a serious conversation. And then finally, the last dimension of an innovation or idea is, how does the audience feel, or how are they approached? Do they feel compelled or pressured to change? Do they feel as though this idea is being imposed upon them? Or do they feel that they are the architect of this idea? Do they feel as if they've arrived at this idea on their own? The answer to that question determines whether the final friction is present in our idea, and it's what we call reactance. And reactance is the idea that when people feel pressured to change, their impulse and instinct, even when it's an undeniably good idea, is to push back. So now that we have this broad model, what I'd like to do is, I believe Apurva shared a case with you, and so I'd like to pick up on that case. I'm going to briefly describe a new innovation. This is an innovation that was undisputably good, but nevertheless failed. And what I want us to do is analyze it through this friction framework. Sound good? All right. So this takes us back in time to the year 1949, and it takes us inside the New York City firehouse. So back in the 40s and 50s, firefighting, like the approach to firefighting, was dominated by a core belief. And that belief was that the most effective and efficient way to combat a fire, to extinguish a fire, was to target what they called the seat of the fire. And the seat of the fire is where the fire burns most intensely. It's the heart, it's the engine. And the thinking is because the seat of the fire does the most damage, you ought to prioritize it. Now, if we think about that approach, you might see that it has some problems. Do any problems occur to you when you think about combating fire in this way? Cassie, do you see any issues with this traditional approach to firefighting?
It might be really dangerous
Why? Yes, why?
to go right after the heart of the fire first.
Yeah, the principal issue is danger. You're asking people to confront, it's often deep in the heart of the structure. So you're going deep into the structure to combat the fire where it is absolutely most dangerous. Are there other reasons that you see? There are a couple others. What do you think? Becca, what might be, do you see any other issues?
I was gonna say what Cassie said, just like the dangerous part.
So danger. Kenneth, any other concerns?
If you just go for the heart of the issue, then you're not limiting the potential for it to spread to other structures or regions around it.
Yeah, the two principal issues here are danger and containment. So one, they're rushing in precisely where the fire is most dangerous, and to really understand the risk here. So if we were to light this bookshelf on fire, you would see flames, you would see smoke, but what you would not see is the gas that would begin to fill the room. And that gas is itself flammable. And if the room hits a critical temperature, all that gas ignites, creating what firefighters call a flashover. In essence, the room becomes a ball of flame, and that is a worst case scenario for them. So one, it's highly dangerous, and two, in this traditional approach, while you are confronting the seat of the fire, the area of the fire where the most damage has already occurred, the fire is allowed to spread. So seeing those problems, the New York City fire chief said, we got to find a better way. And they heard about this new revolutionary technique, a radical approach to firefighting that out of all places came out of Stockholm, Sweden. And it was called the Spritzer Method. And the Spritzer Method is different in two principal ways. So in the traditional approach, if you care about the flames, the way you combat the flames is through a high-powered hose, a water cannon. In the Spritzer Method, they didn't prioritize the flames and the smoke. They prioritized the gas and temperature. And water cannons aren't good for that. They designed a new technology that sprayed a mist, an extremely cold mist, into the air. And the idea is this mist would fill the room and it would push the smoke and gas out and it would bring down the temperature. And rather than rushing in to confront sort of the heart of the fire, they focused on containment. So they'd begin externally and slowly move in only as it was safe to do so. This approach, the Spritzer Method, firefighting has advanced a lot, of course. This approach is superior than the traditional method. It is a better way to do things. It's an undeniably better innovation. It's safer, more effective in all kinds of ways. The New York fire chiefs could see that, so they said, we are going to change practices. The future of firefighting in New York City, we are putting down hoses, we are picking up spritzer bottles. Now, they don't change practices lightly. So step one, information training, explaining the benefits to firefighters, learning about the system and how it works. Phase two, simulated training, using it in controlled fires, getting comfortable with the new technology, hands-on experience. After that phase was complete, they picked a date, let's say it's August 1st. Starting August 1st is a new day. No longer do we use the hose, from this day forth, we use spritzer bottles. And the fire chiefs think this is going to be a huge success. After all, it's keeping firefighters safe. So to their great surprise, they can't believe it when change doesn't occur. August 1st comes and goes, and the firefighters keep using the hoses. Only if the fire chiefs look over their shoulder will they begrudgingly use the new technology. The new technology is breaking or going missing. I put that in quotes because it was later determined firefighters were actively tampering with the new technology. That is how big a failure this was. They had spritzer saboteurs. So by any measure, this was a failure. What I'd like us to think about is analyze why through the lens of a friction mindset. So first, does this represent, well, let me do it differently. Let's just open it up to the room to pull more of you in. When you think about inertia, is this big change or slight change? When you think about effort, what is the cost of implementation? Emotion, does this new technology maybe threaten them, create anxiety or fear? And finally, do they feel like they had the choice to adopt, or is it imposed on them? What frictions do you see in the Spritzer method? What do you see? Oh, is it Alina? What do you see?
Probably change. Like people are afraid of change or not used to it, maybe I would say, because they've been doing something that way for so long. And it's such a firefight response thing. I think that they probably weren't used to it and then just wanted to revert back to old methods.
Okay, so now if you were to put that in a box, is what you're describing sort of the size of change? Are you saying it's radical change? Are you saying it's difficult? What box would you put that in?
I would probably say it's difficult.
So what we're saying is, is the Spritzer system a radical departure from what they've been doing, or is it a slight change? It's a radical departure. It is literally a foreign concept. This has come from abroad. Big change means heavy inertia. What other frictions do you see? What else is? Yeah, please.
Sorry. Hi, this is Chelsea.
Hey,
So
Chelsea.
I think one of the big pressures here is that it's really being pushed on them, right? So there's of course the emotional reaction because it's their lives on the line, but also that the major change that it represents is coming from the top down, and maybe the education and awareness of the benefit hasn't been communicated well.
All right. So perhaps this sense of pressure, compliance, I heard top down. Maybe these people could have been open to the change, but because they're feeling pressured, they're pushing back against it. That sounds right. So we see inertia and reactance. What else? What else do you see other frictions at play? Let's look at effort. If you were to diagnose effort, is going from the traditional method and now putting down your hose, picking up spritzer bottles, is that easy or hard, would you say?
Speaking on the cost wise, I do feel like it's a whole new infrastructure of materials. So that could be, a cost towards that.
Okay. Now, if you think, so that's a financial cost. What about in terms of just putting it into practice, in terms of implementation? Is that easy for them to do? What do you think?
You have to kind of completely retrain your whole firefighting force into new methods and new ideas. So you have an investment in training.
Yeah. Imagine you've got 30 years on the job. You've got 30 years of deep habit in the traditional approach. Psychologically, is breaking that habit easy for people? Is it easy for you to say, you've done it this way for 30 years, now I'm going to change practice? Now, Kenneth, based on what you just said, can we think about ways in which effort might be greater for some than others? So if you to think about, not all firefighters are the same, who might think about this as more threatening? In other words, they might look at this, for some, it may seem like changing practice is hugely effortful. For others, it might seem less costly. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think you could pretty easily say it's hard to teach an old dog new tricks. So the longer you've been in the system, the more effort it is to change to a new system.
Okay. So if you were, for your own initiatives, you might segment the audience and think, aha, in this case, it's the veterans who might most feel this effort-based friction because they have such deep built-up habits. If you're in training, if you've got a year on the job, this friction might be less problematic. Now, how about emotion? This turns out to be by far the most important friction. And once you understand this, you would see why change was never going to happen. Turns out this idea was threatening to people. Can you figure out why? Yeah, Abby.
Their personal safety is at risk.
Okay. So now, why? Because on the surface, they're being told this is safer. Why do you say their safety's at risk?
I mean, if I had a giant hose full of water and somebody handed me a squirt bottle instead, I'd be a little nervous.
Yeah, so beautiful. So your great insight emphasizes that this is about perception. So maybe in reality, this is better, but they perceive it perhaps as risky because, I don't know, maybe this doesn't convey potency, right? Turns out the people who have the most clout, the most standing, the most respected firefighters were the people most threatened by this. And to see why, let's think about where clout comes from. So the most respected firefighters are firefighters that have two features. One, seniority. The ones that have got 20, 30 years on the job tend to be most respected because they've earned that respect. But where else does respect come from in a firehouse? Any thoughts? Just take some guesses. Where do you think it comes from? Seniority, and it comes from something else.
Display of bravery and courage.
Yeah. The person who takes on the most risk. Very nice. And who is that in the traditional method? Who do you think that is in the traditional method? It's the people at the front of the hose. In other words, this new technology, imagine you're the person who's got all the glory because you're the person at the front of the hose. The new technology, to the fire chief's perspective, this should be something they embrace because it's going to make them safer and better and help them fight fires more efficiently. But what they're saying is this might strip my status, my position within the group. So now that you know what the frictions are, what would you do? And if you say, I'm going to emphasize the benefits or incentivize, if you fall back on fuel-based mindsets, I'm going to pull down this bookshelf. If we switch from fuel to friction, how might we remove these frictions to create change? Here's where the creativity is required. What do you think? Cassie, any thoughts in this inadequate amount of time? What might be a way to change the Spritzer idea, change the innovation so that it is less full of friction? How could we remove the friction, Cassie?
Get your team more involved in the decision-making process.
What might that look like? Sounds right to me.
Send some over there to Sweden to
Okay.
to see more about this. Reduce the reactants.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is Rather than it feel like this is a fire chief's idea imposed upon them, what you're suggesting is maybe the way to reduce reactants is to get people to feel as though they have helped develop this idea. What we would call, what you'd see in the book, we would call this co-designing the idea. It's one of the methods for reducing reactants. What else might we do? Got to be some other ideas.
It seems like there would be some reactants to this, but maybe flip who's at the front of the hose.
So, and what do we do? What is that? How does that reduce a friction?
The people that are most junior and maybe less ingrained in the system of fighting fires the old way get to be a part of maybe the change.
All right. So one element of that is who you might target. Purvis talking about is who you might target to pick up this technology. Can we run with that? Or how about this? Let's focus on, let's think about inertia for a second. If the issue is this is radical change, how could we reduce the degree of change, or how could we even symbolically, like visually, superficially, in terms of look and feel, how could we make this new technology feel more familiar? Any thoughts there?
I think if you can put an attachment on the existing hoses that would modify the spray to be more of a spritzing type application,
Yes.
then they'd still have the comfort of holding their large hoses and that kind of thing.
Yes. Now, rational agents don't care about elements like this, but we are not that. It's a beautiful idea. So rather than a totally different design, let's use our existing design and create modification. So now it's more familiar. Making it more familiar will reduce resistance. Other ideas? A couple more.
Kind of building off that and like slowly introducing the like new technology by maybe starting with one crew and then let them get familiar and then add on to like maybe different trucks and stuff like that.
So maybe it's not just change the look and feel to make it more familiar. Let's put the Purvis observation together with your own, which is maybe in your analysis you'd say, we are going to target the people for whom this is less threatening, both less threatening emotionally, emotion-based friction, and effort-based friction. So who we might target are people who are junior firefighters. So this story, the founder of my department was involved in this, and the way they created this change was very much not through adding benefits, not through supercharging the spritzers, not through incentives, not through a fuel-based approach, but rather they changed the look and feel. I love the modification example. They turned the spritzer into a flamethrower looking device. You know, that looks closer to a hose here, you're not spritzing. And secondly, they modified the nature of change. So the key insight was to incorporate this into the existing practice. So what they did is targeted junior firefighters who weren't threatened by this change. They weren't going to lose standing if they picked up the new technology. And for them, they didn't have deep built up habits. And the idea was that became what was known as the alpha team. And they would come in and focus on containment. And then the traditional people, the people who were highly connected to and identified with the traditional method, would come in and fight fire in the traditional method. And rather than just thinking we can create change overnight, instead, the thought was, let's roll this out over a period of years and slowly remove the traditional approach. And that's ultimately what got this off the ground. A good way to end, so I'm not gonna dig into, let me do one more, and I think a nice way to end a final case study that I think can capture the power and promise of thinking in friction and not just fuel, and then we can pause for a brief Q&A. So think about the first generation of online dating platforms. Match.com, what's the other one where you got to do all the questions? eHarmony, so Match.com, eHarmony, those first generation platforms. They have, so you've got one of your wants is better engagement and retainment. They have the same want. Match.com has a lot of people signing up, but a lot of those people quickly drop off. And Match.com doesn't like that, of course. They want long-term sustained users, or at least they want them on there first until they meet somebody. The way Match.com tries to create that change is by, like everyone else, they apply fuel. They try and make the website look more polished. They try and show you all the attractive singles available to you, etc. Turns out the principal reason that people drop off isn't because fuel's insufficient. It's because of these frictions that are embedded in that user experience. So when you think about these first generation platforms, if you think about, say, Match.com, what are some of the frictions do you think that might hold people back from either initiating or the reason why once they get on the platform, they drop off? What do you think some of the frictions are of traditional online dating?
I think it would be overwhelmingly fear of rejection.
Ah, fear of particularly maybe for the people who are least inclined to handle it. So imagine you see this person and this person might be the one, and you craft the perfect email, the right wit, the right seriousness, you get it just right, you send it out. And Hayden, what do you think often happens?
Left on red.
Yeah, maybe you hear things like, you're too short, I don't date Republicans, you're too old, or maybe worst of all is what Hayden's saying, you never hear anything at all. So that's an emotional friction is what you're identifying. Are there other frictions that you might see? What else might be holding people back?
Catfishes.
Aha. So whether it's true or not, that fear that is this person who they say they are, right? That fear and anxiety might push people away. What are other frictions?
I feel like it's like not the norm to meet online, or like it's like differing from old ways anyways.
Okay, and so here, much like the firefighter case, you might see how different populations experience that differently. So if you're thinking about the first wave, like when this was a brand new idea, or generationally, you know, I'm in my 40s, so me and above, that could feel like this idea of meeting people online. You know, that's not the good traditional way. Like you used to do it drunk at a bar. You know, that's how my parents did it. That's the right way to do it. So that's inertia because it's so different from the past. Are there other frictions, you think?
Yeah, kind of along Melissa's thought. I know for my band of grown-ups, you didn't want your friends to know you were online dating. I guess it was like maybe a little bit of a social faux pas when it was starting out, like kind of a desperation thing.
Yeah. So I met my wife on Match, and it's, you know, it's not a great origin story, right? I want this chance encounter origin story. But so for some, now for others, different generationally, there may be none of that stigma. But if there's a stigma around it, if that's what people perceive, then that is an emotional friction. And notice fuel, like all the things Match would do to entice, it helps with none of those problems. It does not address catfish concerns. It does not address stigma. It does not address any of those things. The reason, there's a wonderful paper looking at this, the reason Tinder became the market leader. Tinder and the second wave have left Match.com in the dust. Tinder has become the dominant force, in large part because Tinder identified the friction that they didn't see and removed it from the process. So if you've got some familiarity of how Tinder works, how does Tinder have, it hasn't removed all the frictions of online dating, but it's removed some essential ones. Do you see any of the frictions that the Tinder experience doesn't have that things like eHarmony and Match.com do?
I mean, it feels like a much lower risk situation. You're investing a lot less. It's a yes or no, not here's who I am in my whole life and my passions, you know?
Aha. So humans are highly attentive, sensitive to energy and effort. So that seeming benefit, functional benefit of, spend a full day doing a deep profile that seems like it's going to offer value, often the things we do to create value can inadvertently heighten friction. So Tinder is less effort. That reduces the friction of effort and exertion. What else? What else? There's a way in which, yes, please.
I was going to say it's a little less likely for rejection because you can't really talk to anybody until you both show that you are like interested.
Yes, that is the key element. That is the key insight that Tinder had. In Match.com, someone has to take a risk. I have to personalize a message and I send it to you and wait for your return. Tinder operates differently. The way Tinder works is you identify people of interest and you are matched with people who do what?
I've already selected you.
Who have shown initial interest in you. In other words, that fact, right? If you've reached out to someone and they've also signaled initial support and you see that it's a match or whatever it says, that removes some of that initial hesitancy or fear because each party is independently indicating some initial level of interest. That experience reduces the acute anxiety, not all of the anxiety, you can still experience fear in other ways, but that intense anxiety of rejection that people often have on Match, Tinder saw that friction and removed it, and from that became the dominant player. I'd like to end on this point because what I want to emphasize, I think the power and promise of thinking in friction. Friction is not just about removing little hiccups, making things run a little bit smoother. When you can see the frictions that other people have missed, often it is the path to tremendous growth. We are at time. This was for 11 o'clock. I know many of you may have meetings to go to. I can hang out here for 10, 15 minutes or so. If there's any questions, if that's not conventional, that's fine too. But before I do any of that, for those who have to jump off, so Apurva, do they know about the book?
Yeah, they do know. Guys, everybody who's joined the session today will get a copy of the book when it releases in October. One burning question for me to you, Loran, while everybody's still on the call. Any guidance for when we are reading the book? I love the opportunity to co-implement chapter, as you're reading a couple chapters to put it in practice. Would there be any guidance if you really wanted to embrace some of the learnings here? How would you coach us in, putting some of this to practice?
Yeah. So the thing that might hold you back is the effort. And so let me make this easier for you. So one, I hope that what you're seeing is that once you start spotting the frictions, like the mind doesn't want to see them, once you shine a light on them, often many of the solutions are intuitive. There are another set of friction removing strategies, and there are some strategies that can take a friction and in fact turn it into fuel. In the book, we focus very heavily on these practical strategies. So that's number one. Number two, you should be empowered to begin putting this into practice now, because just if you see a friction, often the solution is clear. But the best response is, I will be sending you, so I'll send on to you, we've got some tools. It's called the Friction Finder. And it is a template, it's a framework. So the book doesn't come out until October 5th, but right away today, I will send you some tools that help you put these ideas into action, to help you overcome that process. So both you can do it intuitively, you'll learn some strategies in the book, and I'll share some frameworks and tools with you today.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah,
guys, we'll keep it open for 10 minutes while we have Loran. If you guys want to fire away any questions.
I have a question, Apurva. Casey here. Loran, a lot of the people, thank you so much, by the way, this presentation was excellent. A lot of the people on the call are interns, and they're probably thinking, I see frictions already, what can I do to help at my company? And in the firefighting example, we said sometimes the more senior level people are the hardest to, convince and persuade. Any tips, tricks, advice for, people just starting out feeling like they're only an intern, but wanting to add value?
Yeah. This is a great question. So the challenge you're facing might call influence without authority, influence without formal authority. And that is one of the great advantages of thinking in terms of fuel, or in terms of friction, because many of the components of fuel, things like incentives, are only available to us with certain levels of formal authority. If you do this analysis, the question you should ask yourself, are there opportunities, given my role, given the opportunities of my role in the environment, to remove friction? And very often the answer is yes. So an example might be small changes to the effort calculus, a huge impact on what people do. So if you are an intern and you want people to do things and they are not doing them, a lot of things that on the surface feel like resistance and rejection, and the human mind thinks, oh, they don't like this idea, they don't find this idea appealing. The real driver is that there's some inconvenience, there's some element. And my guess is if the interns in the room simply focused on effort, and for any change you are trying to create, if you ask yourself, what are all the little points of inconvenience? What are the friction points? And how could I remove even just one or two of those? Behavior will change. Here would be a very simple one to make this tangible. One aspect of effort is just remembering. Can we make it easy? Often, simply reminders or creating windows of opportunity for people to do something makes it easier. So an intern might ask, what's the inconvenience here? And are there ways I can reduce that process? On that note, I think I don't know that this is maybe not intern specific, but just to show you the power of effort, this could be a good place to end. This might sound obnoxious. That principle can change your life. And here's how. This is a great thing to use maybe with other interns or people, sort of peers. How many of you want to be helpful, but if you say yes to everything, you become overwhelmed? That is every single one of you. If it isn't now, it will be. I bet every single one of us could feel overwhelmed because we sit on yes, like we say yes to a lot of things and then we become overwhelmed. Using the effort principle, we can change your life forever in this way. A good rule of thumb is when people ask something of you, say yes if you want to do it, but ask them to take the first step. Like if another intern wants your help and you want to help, but if you're doing that all the time, you become overrun, you can't do what you want to do, say, absolutely, but just put an invite in my calendar. If someone wants you to look at their resume, of course, just send me an email about your long-term aspirations. If you ask people to take the simplest step, 8 out of 10 times, what happens?
They don't follow up.
You will never hear from them again. You react in a spirit of generosity, but you will never hear from them again. And I would argue you don't have time for those people. It's a way, just thinking about, so you can create friction too, to drive the behavior you want. That simple thing has changed my life. And if you put it into practice, I think it can change yours as well. That's a great question, Cassie. Any other questions about the ideas, friction theory, or the book?
Speaking as an intern, this is Andre LaRock from Polycar, by the way.
Hey,
just speaking as someone who knows a lot of young people and interns that have a lot of great ideas and don't know how to necessarily identify frictions right away. Is there a strategy maybe for kind of calling someone out or calling yourself out for identifying, hey, you have a lot of great ideas, but here are the frictions?
Yeah, so I think first, when you're saying young people, you're creating some emotional friction in me because it's quite clear I'm not in that category any longer. So that's a bit of a transition for me. But when you, that's a joke, Andre. So
I was laughing, I had my camera off, sorry.
So this is where I would use the framework. So we are going to give you a framework that allows you to map the frictions. And so what I would simply say is, I would encourage people to do that analysis. And the beautiful thing about it is these frictions tend to hide in plain sight. Some require perspective taking, some require, like if you don't understand the hopes and desires and concerns of online daters, it's hard to fully understand the friction. But in your analysis, I'd encourage you, so often, the great thing about blind spots is once they're pointed out to us, we become aware of them. So as you think about this process, don't abandon fuel. Ideas need fuel. Without fuel, they're inert. But I would do the analysis, whether you use this language, whether you use this framework, but you may ask questions. So the questions here provide a great framework. So you might ask questions like, so what do you think, what's the cost of this? And then if they say it's high, how can we make this a little easier? So one question, how can we make this a little easier? Are there ways to reduce the scale or size of change? Like how could we shrink it or make this a little more familiar? How can we build them into the process? And this is where truly, and you're getting the book, so I'm not selling you on the book. The book really lays out a lot of strategies around implementation and reducing these ideas.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the book launches October 5th. An audiobook so there's audiobook coming out soon, a month afterward. I am so delighted to share this with you. I hope you find value in it. I would like to end, I can answer more questions too, but just please do not hesitate to reach out. You know, if you take the time to think and sit with these ideas, put them into practice, if you'd like to share experiences, if you'd like to get feedback on a key initiative, like do this analysis, Andre, that's one way we could do this. Do not hesitate to reach out for me. I devote 45 minutes every day for people who want to do a friction analysis. So that's one way. we can keep the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'll definitely take you up on that.
Excellent. And I will make sure my contact information. So I'll send materials. I'll share this information along with some tools to put the ideas into practice. And you'll see my email there. We could also connect on LinkedIn.
Great. Loran, thank you so much for your time. Really excited about, reading the book and putting a lot of this into practice. To the group, we are going to put, one piece of friction in getting the book was attending the session. The second piece of friction we're going to put in is we need your addresses for where you want us to send this book in October when it releases. So definitely comply so you guys can, get this novel when it does get out there. And other than that, thank you guys so much for attending today. This was awesome. And great to see you, Loran. Really
Likewise.
Appreciate you spending the time with us.
Well, I know something about the mission of your work, and it's really important work. It's really awesome work. It's really great to meet you all. And I hope these ideas help you, this framework helps you put some of these ideas into practice and see your innovations come to life. So good luck. Thank you so much. And hope to be in touch.